What is going on, YouTube? I decided today I would finally get around to making a quick video about some of my favorite vintage nifty 50s. Now, I've had each of these lenses for a different amount of time, some quite a bit longer than others, because some of them are harder to find than others, but I appreciate each one of them for different reasons, and all of those reasons are subjective, but I will give you a little bit of my own personal opinion on each of these lenses. So the one I want to start with, and probably one of the easier ones to find, is the SMC Pentax K-mount 50mm 1.4. This is the first K-mount version of this lens. They later came out with the M version, which is a lot easier to find, but this is my favorite version. I have shot on Pentax is where I started, so virtually every Pentax 50mm, including the Takumars and the Auto Takumars. I've shot with the Auto Tac 51.8 and the early 8 element, or is it 7 element? I think it's 7 element. Maybe it's 8. No, it is 8. My goodness. Yeah, the early 8 element 51.4, and then the later thoriated 7 element 51.4. And then the later M version, but this one is my favorite because in my personal opinion, I think this one has some of the best center sharpness. In my opinion, as much as I love this guy over here, which we'll talk about later, I'd say this guy beats that lens in center sharpness. I think it's very comfortable. It renders colors beautifully. It handles black and white very well. It has better contrast than most of these lenses. So as far as, As far as rarity, this is not the most difficult lens to find. It's more difficult than the M mount version, but usually if you're searching on eBay and you look for like a Pentax KX, a lot of those cameras came with the 51.4 mounted on the front. This is actually my second 51.4 K mount that I've purchased. Sadly, the first one had a bit of a tumble and ended up getting severely damaged, but I loved it so much I had to get another copy. And if I just wanted a cheap walk around nifty 50, this would probably be the one. I am less worried about losing it because it's cheaper to replace, and it just renders everything beautifully. I love it for portraits, I love it for landscape. It's a great overall lens. So the next one here, and I didn't put these in any particular order, they're just all pretty. This is the Icarex 35S, and I should mention that I have used all of these lenses on a Canon EOS R. I don't shoot a lot of film, and I think 2 out of these 4 cameras actually work, like are 100% functional. The Icarex being the least functional, but here's the Carl Zeiss Ultron 50mm 1.8. This lens took a very long time to find. I had the Scoperex 35 3.5 and still do, and I bought that about 4 or 5 years ago. And then finally, I found a copy of this in Arizona. It was the bayonet mount, and it was an estate sale, and I got it for very cheap. And then lightning, of course, struck twice, and just a few weeks after finding the bayonet version, I found the M42 version, and I sold the bayonet mount one. I actually like and prefer the bayonet mount, but it's just easier as far as the mounting goes to just get an M42 adapter. So I swapped out the bayonet for this guy. Another fun fact about this one is that I had it professionally CLR'd, or cleaned, lubricated, all that, at Forster's Camera in Salt Lake City, Utah, and I forget his first name, but the Forster that works there, that worked on this lens, the father of the 2 that work there, he has a photographic memory. So I was worried because people kept saying this was a very unique lens as far as the optical formula, as far as the blades, but sending it to someone with a photographic memory kind of helped me feel a little bit more relaxed about him cleaning it for me and putting it back together, which he did in like one day, which was amazing. Anyway, I don't generally treat this lens like a 51.8. I treat it more like a 52.8 or 2.4, something in there. It's got a clickless aperture. Let me see. As you can see, there's no clicks here, and I actually love the 5 blades in there as opposed to some lenses that have a lot more blades, but as soon as you stop it down, I actually think lenses with less blades have more character. That's my personal opinion. It actually had a little, I can't figure out where it is, but there's a little clip on one side of this where originally, if you stopped it down to anywhere and then you let go of the clip, it would automatically go back to being wide open, and I didn't like that. So both on my Scoper X and my Ultron, I've actually glued that little pin in place so that I can, adjust the aperture to where I want it and keep it there without having to hold my hand on the little switch. But anyway, I really like this lens for black and whites. That's one of my favorite things to use it for. I feel like stopping it down just a little bit, wide open, it's probably the least clinical of these 4 lenses. A lot of people like to brag on the Ultron as being like this super sharp lens. It has the concave front element, which is really cool, but I don't think it's nearly as clinically sharp as any of the other lenses that I've got here. But I do love the rendering. But like I said, specifically black and white. Probably just because I have to stop it down a bit more, but once I do, it becomes beautifully sharp and still has lovely out of focus area. And like I said, I actually love the 5-bladed bokeh, and I've taken some really good portraits with this lens. That's one of my favorite things to use it for, black and white portraiture. I'm sure there's lots of other things to use it for, but that's my personal favorite. And it's very comfortable and it's very unique looking. Probably the oldest of the 4 here. I'm not 100% sure on that, but I'm pretty sure about it. Anyway, so that's the Ultron. Love it. This guy right here, the Canon FD 55mm 1.2 Aspherical, SSC Aspherical. Anyway, there's a couple versions of this lens. The earlier one that's got the hand carved? I don't know. The aspherical element is grinded by hand, and that one is even more rare and valuable, but this is still a very expensive lens. I was lucky enough to find this on Christmas Eve last year. Just happened to stumble across it, and at a very affordable price from someone that didn't really know what they had. That's usually how it goes. So this lens I know is very valuable because people tend to rehouse it to use it for cinematography, but it is another, sorry, my finger's in the shot. It is another lens that is amazing for portraiture. The farther you get away from your subject with this lens, the softer it is wide open. But if you're specifically using it for headshots, or even like slightly farther distance, portraits, it doesn't just have to be like waist up. But if you're closer up, if you're at a portrait distance and you're using this lens, even at 1.2, it is incredibly sharp for a vintage lens. And I don't have a lot of other vintage 55 1.2s to compare it to. I used to have the Pentax 50 1.2. But I preferred this guy because I felt like the Pentax 51.2, as much of a following as it has and as many people love that lens, I tested it out and I thought that the bokeh was not my favorite, and I felt like wide open, no matter how close or far away you were, there was no sweet spot where I felt like it was at a level of sharpness that I appreciated. Even if I wasn't pixel peeping or zooming in, I preferred this 51.4 all day. This guy right here though, wide open for portraits. That's basically what this was made for. I've shot it stopped down at a farther distance, and it doesn't take much to sharpen up. If I'm far enough away that I can see, okay, this lens is not as sharp as I would like it to be, I will stop down even just to 1.8 or f2, and suddenly it's bitingly sharp again. So it's an amazing lens. Very difficult to find the aspherical version. I don't know how much of a difference the aspherical version makes, but it's hard to part with a lens that's this difficult to find at an affordable price. If you go check eBay, you'll be like, yeah, I wouldn't buy one of those online. Anyway, great portrait lens. Probably great for low light. I haven't shot it a lot in low light, but I think I have a couple times and gotten some pretty decent photos out of it. And then lastly, I've got this Contax Carl Zeiss Planar 50 1.4. This was another lens where I found this online. The guy had posted this with a whole bunch of other camera gear, mostly articles that I thought were complete garbage, things that I thought no one's going to buy that for anything. And this originally had a lens cap on it, so I didn't know what was lying there, but I saw it was Contax, so I said, maybe. So I said, can I get a picture with the lens hood off? And he did, or the lens cap off, and it had another cover, what's it called? The clear cover on the front that was covered in crap. So I really didn't know what the appearance of the lens was until it arrived in the mail. Once again, got a really good deal. As soon as I took the cover off, I went, wow, that is actually really clean. Probably one of the cleanest copies I've ever seen. And let me just do a quick size comparison here between that and the 55 1.2. You can see the 55 1.2 is particularly or recognizably larger, noticeably larger. It's even larger over here if I add the lens hood. That's like a really big, something I wouldn't want to carry around on the daily, but it's, it'll get attention if that's what you're into. Anyway, this is actually one of my favorite film cameras, but also one of my favorite 51.4s. I mean, nifty 50s. That's obviously why it's on this list. These are all the ones that I like to use regularly. Some people might feel a little bummed that there's not like an Olympus out here. I've just never had good luck finding good deals on Olympus lenses. If I did, I would probably do a comparison of that with the Pentax because that seems to be its number one competitor. Anyway, 51.4. This one, in my opinion, has some of the most unique out of focus area when it's wide open. It's almost painterly. It's a little smudgy, but not like an ugly smudge, Like, it'll throw you off the first time you try it. And that was what I was told. And then I took some flower photos and I took some portraits and I thought, wow, the way that it goes from, crisp to soft in that out of focus area is just very unique and very pretty. I think this lens is really good for both the reds and blues if you're shooting in color. It's probably not my top black and white choice. That's still going to be the Ultron, or even wide open, the Pentax, because I think this one is crisper wide open. But there's some kind of character with the Contax Planar 51.4. Oh, and also I got to mention this is like the, whatever the secondary version is that some people claim has better contrast or coatings, right? Now, a lot of cinematographers will say, I want the earlier version because I like less coating, because I want more lens flare, etc. This is the later model. I have never compared the two, but I absolutely love this lens. Which I've said about each of these because, obviously, I don't think anyone would complain about owning any of these four nifty 50s. I think each one of them is amazing for portraiture. These two specifically very good for black and white. These two I'd say specifically for color. I would say as far as the color cast goes, there's not a whole lot of color cast on the Pentax. The overall colors are a slight bit washed out on the Ultron compared to the other three, which is probably another reason to really love it for black and white. Not saying that some people don't prefer less contrast and slightly less strong colors, but for me, this is a black and white lens. This is actually a thoriated lens. I didn't mention that before. But as opposed to every Takumar and Pentax thoriated lens that I've used, this specific lens I feel has a bit of more of an amber cast. I'm not sure if that's the correct term. So these are very yellow. They talk about de-yellowing. I don't get a lot of yellow cast when I shoot or take photos with this lens. It's a little bit warmer, maybe just a slight more on the red side, but it's not overwhelming. When I've taken test photos with all four of these, though, it's noticeable that there's slightly more cast on this particular lens, but it's never stopped me from loving this lens, and it's never been something that's been so overpowering that I couldn't quickly adjust it in Lightroom if I was shooting digital. So that's basically everything I have to say about these 4 lenses. They're all amazing. They're all difficult to find. I mean, like I said, this is probably the easiest one to find. This one literally took me years, and I'm not counting eBay because I'm not paying eBay prices. But if you're patient, you can find these. It just takes a long time. Same with this guy. I've only found one ever online that wasn't on eBay, that was at a decent price where someone was selling it, and I was able to say, sure, I'll take that bet. And I don't know. I don't think this one's very easy to find either. I've seen a lot of the 1.7s online, not as many 1.4s, and usually the later models go for more money once again on eBay. So all I can say is just be patient. Just be patient. Don't pay eBay prices unless you're like already retired or have a very good job. I'm not someone that's making a ton of money. I'm a college student right now, but I'm patient. And coincidentally, I think all 4 of these lenses I had mailed to me, so I didn't actually know what condition any of them were in until they got to me. But each one, luckily enough, was stored for a very long time without being used. None of the lenses were kept in old cases where they would probably gather a lot of fungus from the moisture. All of them have smooth focus rings, smooth apertures. I love each of them, and I guarantee that if you are patient, very patient, if you can just learn to just say, okay, if I can't find it now, eventually it'll show up, that you can find each one of these at a reasonable price. And I guarantee you're going to love each one.